Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me? All good?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
All right, awesome. Welcome everyone to our July meetup. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we are still doing this digitally, but we also have an announcement later on some activities that we are also working on, and yeah, we'll share it towards the end of tonight's session. But yeah, because of the pandemic, unfortunately for now, we're still doing it, through online media. Okay, so we have an interesting topic for tonight, and it is on building products in the emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, and we're gonna take a deep look into the fintech space, not only in the Philippines but rather in the entire Southeast Asian region. As most of you know, the Southeast Asian region has been a center for different disruptive technologies and solutions globally, and especially now that we are in the pandemic, there has been more demand towards digitalizing various solutions and integrating different products all together. Right. So for those who are joining us again for the first time, we are Product PH. Product PH is an organization of practitioners from the product management and the product development space. So it's composed of various roles and people. It ranges from product managers all the way to UX designers, all the way to QA engineers, business owners, and even those who wish to jump into and move into a career in product management. And our vision is for world-class products to be built here in the Philippines. As I've said, with the rapid growth of technology here in the Southeast Asian region, we want the Philippines to be at the forefront of it. And we aim to provide an open space for people um, to be able to connect and present their products and build their ideas and establish relationships with each other. And we usually do this in the form of events, meetups, and right now, since again we are in a lockdown or in a global pandemic, we are doing it through virtual interactions. Okay, just a few reminders before we start. For this one, since we will be having a presentation from Mike Dickinson, um, we would like to request everyone, if you have any questions, please access our Slido page. So you can just, I think Yana posted it in the Jitsi chat, so you can access it to sli.do, and the event code is product PH7. Again, that's sli.do, event code is product PH7. We'll be having a brief, oh, there you go. Thanks, Yana. We'll also be having a brief Q&A right after Mike's presentation later on. And lastly, since this is a live event, we will also be posting the recorded session later on to our channels on YouTube and Facebook. So later on, if you want to take a look into it, please feel free to do so. Okay, as I mentioned, for this, we have an interesting topic for this month. So it's on building products for emerging markets. And we are very happy to have Mike Dickinson. He's the CPO at Brankas. Mike, welcome to our Product PH July session. And thanks again for accepting our invite for this month.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Probably, yeah. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Brankas?
Yeah, 100%. So, hi guys, I am Chief Product Officer for Brankas. I run the product team for the company. The company is what we're pursuing at the moment is building out open banking technologies and surfacing these towards fintechs, right? So we didn't. The product team was extremely small when I joined in January at the beginning of this year. What we're sort of focusing on our products, which are servicing both fintech companies, but also pretty much any business that has any sort of financial infrastructure that needs improving within Southeast Asia, right? So, and we can go a little bit more into that when we get to the presentation. But so yes, that's a little bit about Brankas. Prior to this, I was working at Zendit as Chief Product Officer, which is a payment gateway based in Indonesia. And then before that, I've been working in hospitality tech, or hotel tech, should I say, as well as also digital marketing and using machine learning concepts in order to improve that. E-learning and a couple of other things. So that's sort of what I've been doing.
Awesome, Mike. May I ask where you're based right now, Mike?
I'm in sunny Singapore. Well, not so sunny at the moment. I usually do a lot of traveling around, up down to Indonesia or up to the Philippines. But of course, that's not really happening right now.
Yeah, unfortunately. All right. Whenever you're ready, Mike, feel free to share your screen and start your presentation.
Yeah, sure, no problem. All right, just sharing my screen now. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, all good, Mike.
Yep.
Okay, cool, awesome. Again, hey, I'm Mike. So what are we doing at Brankas? Our vision is to make financial services accessible to everyone. Southeast Asia is our sort of core markets at the moment. We focus on Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam at the moment, with most of our customers based in Indonesia and the Philippines right now. I guess, just a bit of background. I joined Brankas back in January this year. And the reason why I joined Brankas is because, one of the cornerstones of society is financial infrastructure, right? And I believe that if we are able to, I don't want to use this word, but it really is the democratization of financial infrastructure. It will provide opportunities for people in areas around Southeast Asia, which is a lot harder to access these sorts of opportunities, whether it's starting a business, a micro business, even a small to medium-sized business, finding funding to be able to do that, whether it's to enable the rails for payments to happen more easily, or the sharing of financial data with some of these companies. We want to improve the rails for this to happen in this part of the world. So a little bit about that, about Brankas itself. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our company structure. Sorry, Yana, I just threw in like a couple of extra slides based on your feedback. So with our structure at Brankas is that our business is really split between two sides, our supply side and demand side. Let me explain a little bit. Our supply side refers to the services that we provide to banks in helping construct and architect their open APIs. Open banking in Southeast Asia today is exceedingly rudimentary, apart from Singapore, right? Singapore open banking has progressed a lot. What is really fascinating about Singapore is that the open banking sort of ecosystem over here has grown organically. In other words, banks haven't really have had guidelines to follow, but the banks over here have been very very, very good at adapting to the open banking philosophy, right? What does that open banking philosophy mean? It means that in order to access core banking services, the bank needs to be able to surface these through what would be effectively an open API platform, right? So if you go to the likes of DBS, you go to the likes of UOB in Singapore, you'll be able to find quite quickly the ability to test certain APIs and access certain data points, whether they are more on the payments front, so soliciting a funds transfer, for example, or more on the data front, which is being able to solicit a pull of transactional history from a corporate or retail bank account, right? So that's what we do on the supply side. So we work with banks in Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand in constructing and supporting and constructing the APIs, and also even supporting on developer portals and things like that. So a very services focus of the business. And the reason why we do this is because in order to open up the pipes in Southeast Asia for not just ourselves, but for any company, right, who wants to consume these, it focuses on sort of the demand side, right? So the demand side refers to products, APIs that we're aggregating across these banks in order to provide a single endpoint to do certain things in relation to these financial services, right? If I was to compare us to somebody in the UK, TrueLayer is a equivalent example. Plaid, you might be familiar with from the US. But what's really interesting is that in this part of the world, because use cases are not necessarily as clear, we've had to come up with these slightly different use cases for Southeast Asia, right? And so that's sort of what we're focusing on there. So supply side, demand side. So talking about a demand side, we have what we call our core products. We have 3 core products today. So our direct product, which allows for a direct funds transfer from bank A to bank B via API, right? So at no point do funds hit our accounts in, at the Brankas. We don't store funds on our side. It's literally a way for a business to solicit a funds transfer from one bank account to another, right? The second is our disperse product. So disperse allows for corporates to disperse funds to multiple bank accounts via API. Again, there's no float management. Frankly, we don't really use the disperse product for sending loans and things like that. What we find the use case for here is more around things like payroll, right? Because for a lot of companies, they want to have more security when they are doing disbursements. Our third product is statement, which is the ability for a company to with the consent of the end user to give the transactional data to the fintech company that may be requesting for it. So a use case for this, for example, is a lending company wants to be able to disperse a loan to a user in order to increase the chances of that loan being dispersed, or even maybe increase the value or opportunity for what loan could be dispersed. The end user, at their consent, can provide their transactional data. So that sort of just gives you an idea of the core products that we have. These are all very API focused. A little bit hard to demonstrate what that might look like on the call because of time. But really, if you would like to find out more, go check out our website. There's more information there, as well as documentation. So building product in emerging markets, right? So I just want to put this out there. So building tech product is hard. I think we all know that. Like product market fit and things like that are definitely difficult. I'll tell you that building tech product in emerging markets is very hard because you don't have access to certain things. For example, more open ecosystems like in the US, right, or like even in Berlin or in Australia, right, being able to access certain products and certain organizations being able to surface certain information for you to play with, right? So it's definitely very hard over here, and competition gets pretty fierce as soon as people find out that they are, you're building something which they may want to follow suit on, right? Now, so building tech product in emerging markets during the worst pandemic in 100 years, lol. is what I say to that. It's difficult. It's really difficult, and I mean, I think all of us have, in some way, shape, or form, at least from a business perspective or a career perspective, have already felt the impact, of these of what COVID-19 has brought. Right. So I want to share some of the insights, I guess, from a more general market perspective. Then I'll sort of squeeze down onto individual countries and speak a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted sort of the regulations and things like that from an open banking perspective. Finally, what I'm going to go into is a little bit more about what we're doing at Brankas, our use cases, what we're doing with the team, what we're doing with our products, to give you an idea of like sort of what we're doing. I can tell you that it's, like everything or anything else, we're all learning about what's happening today in the world. So at least what I can try, I hope I can solicit our ideas and thoughts through the sharings that we have in this presentation. Cool. Right, so let's talk general first. So market impact. So there is definitely a shift in demand, right? We're witnessing a massive change in mentality, where startups have to do even more with even less, right? So, we're seeing, for example, we're seeing companies like Traveloka where they're absolutely struggling with the situation that's going on today, right? We're seeing similar things with Gojek as well, right? So we're also seeing that there are other companies which are staying alive, but they're also having to pivot their business in order to to maintain course. But what all this really means is that there's a little bit more of a urgency, I would say, in the atmosphere at the moment, where products need to be shipped faster and they need to stick faster, right? Which is really hard when you think that people are less willing to spend money these days because, well, how do you extend your runways? How do you, both from a personal perspective as well as from a business perspective, right? So there's a shift in demand, right? So I'm going to talk about the two perspectives in relation to Brankas, because this is, sort of giving a bit of an idea of what's happening with banks and sort of the demand side fintechs. So on the bank side, what we're seeing is that there is a desire, and I want to emphasize the word desire, to build new partnerships, products, and services. And I think good examples of this are that, just because people are not able to as easily show up to a retail outlet, a branch outlet, sorry, for a bank, is that there's a digitization of account opening, right? To give you an example, we're getting more sort of organizations coming to us and saying, is it possible that a bank can, open a bank account digitally? Which, of course, there are implications with regulations when you want to do that. Right. Another one is loan origination, so the ability to collect data in order to solicit a loan, right? And how do you provide that to a bank in a digitized way, right? Well, to be honest with you, just generally open APIs, right? All of a sudden, we've had a lot more, sort of banks coming to us and going, hey, like, we think we need to digitize our core banking services. How do I do that? Brankas, can you help, right? And so, of course, like we have those sorts of conversations, right? And of course, and I'll talk a little bit more about the other side, is that fintech companies, and not just fintechs, but actually the e-commerce companies which are there, are dying to access some sort of API infrastructure, which is public, provided by the bank, right? Provided by the bank. But I just want to make a comment about this, right? So the bigger the ship, the harder it is to turn. Reality is that there is a desire to build new partnerships. There is a desire to build products and services, right? But are they actually happening, right? That's the question. And so from my humble view is that I can see that there is a push, but is there, as a result, necessarily new things which are going into market? To be frank, I haven't really seen that much happening, right? Thirdly, there is uncertainty in employment, right? but layoffs are not as drastic as first expected, right? Which says to me that there is, again, the hunger, there's not really that hunger which is really fueling for all these, products and services, other than from companies, right, which are requesting it. So for example, fintechs, e-commerce, and other industries as well, which are trying to get access to this data. So on the other side of the coin, we've got sort of the fintechs, right? So I can tell you that COVID-19 in the likes of Indonesia, even in the Philippines, right, is that, for example, lenders have had to pivot themselves from dispersing funds to collections, right? I mean, people are not wanting to take out loans anymore because they don't know if they can even pay it back, right? And then people are not paying it back because they've lost their jobs. So how do you collect, right? And so there's a lot of that happening. And so a lot of these businesses have restructured themselves to become focused on collection, because in the end, returning those funds is money in the end, right? Also, and this is not just fintechs, this is just technology companies in general. I'm sure we're seeing it in the news, right? There are layoffs to extend runway, right? Layoffs to extend runway of businesses to ensure that they stay alive. What's really interesting is that right now there's a catch-22. There's a mixture of hesitation to build new stuff and needing to build new stuff, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean that, should I build a new product because it's expensive and time-consuming to do that, right? Because I don't know if the market will adopt it, but it's almost like it's almost like gambling. There's a possibility that I could grow off this product, but people or businesses are less inclined to buy, right? However, on the other side, there's a need to build new stuff because the market has completely shifted, right? And so identifying opportunity becomes absolutely core during, for example, through the product development lifecycle. We're talking about the ideation UX research phase, right? Whereby we need to, that there's more emphasis on that so that we can, it decreases the chances of failure, right? And so what this has led to is a lot of Wizard of Ozing, right? Like a lot of Wizard of Ozing is occurring at the moment in the industry, right? Fourth point, in general, there is more push, and this is from the sort of from the fintech side, specifically for banks. There's more push for open APIs so that new use cases can test it. So the needing to build new stuff, right, would be a lot easier if open API infrastructure, the open banking concept, was readily available, right? And so what we're finding is that in all four core markets which we're operating in, is that there's a lot of yelling and screaming happening from the side, which is getting louder because they need to build new stuff. They need to find ways to get out of the COVID-19 quagmire, right? So I'm going to speak more specifically about what's happening with open banking and regulatory trends in Southeast Asia. And I've probably got people on the call which are in fintech, but also people on the call from other sort of technologies. I think it's just interesting to go through each of these sort of countries and see how different countries are responding to the pandemic and what sort of things they have in motion today, because it may spur on ideas for your businesses. For example, we talk to companies in Indonesia whereby they're not fintech companies, they're e-commerce companies, where they want to be able to access transactional information from banking accounts, right, in order to solicit loans directly within the application because they may have a finance part of the business, right? So I'm just going to provide a bit more of an insight into this. So we'll start with, I think, with what is most familiar to people on the call, the Philippines. So open banking standards have been solicited for feedback from organizations by the BSP, right? That's already happening today. Part of this is that there is going to be a QR format which is going to be released towards the end of the year, and also a roadmap will start to develop out of this. But As I mentioned here, there's no solid roadmap yet. What's really interesting about the Philippines, though, is that the pandemic has led to regulatory change, right? For example, InstaPay, I believe, has waived all costs, right? So, and that's actually quite impressive and forward-thinking. I think another thing that's happened is around the KYC process and making it more relaxed, right? And so this is a really interesting sort of way that the Philippines has approached the pandemic, because as we'll go through with other countries in a moment, it's actually it's actually quite unique that it's happening. So the BSP will be setting guidelines for the establishment of digital banks. This is recent news that has come out, and I think this is part and parcel with some of the digital banks which are entering the Philippines, and a lot of this will sort of spur what are the open API formats, right? And of course, payments are still growing in maturity, as I'm sure most of you in the call know. So moving on to what's happening in Indonesia, right? So Indonesia, so open banking standards have been solicited for feedback from fintech companies. Again, similar to the Philippines, but I would say that things have progressed a bit further, right? So a roadmap has been generated through to 2025, and the QRAS, which is the QR Indonesian standard, right, which is a global switching QR network, right, started as actually already started. Sorry, the language here is a little bit confusing. It actually began at the beginning of this year. So to my point before, the pandemic has actually not led to any regulatory changes causing stresses, right? If anything, so there's two main bodies in Indonesia, the Bank of Indonesia and OJK, right? These two bodies sort of share the banking industry, and it does definitely show, right? So there is indecisiveness that's happening in terms of like whether, for example, certain things should be waived, like the Philippines has done, or should they try and maintain course because they have a roadmap in relation to the open banking concepts, right? However, there is, and I think this is pretty similar to pretty much everywhere else, higher penetration on mobile banking, e-wallets, and online account opening. There was a white paper that was released by Rapid quite recently. The highest volume of transactions that are happening within Indonesia today is through the e-wallet OVO, right? And that's quite fascinating. That is the case, and how fast that company or that product has grown. Next, we'll talk about Thailand. So Thailand's a very interesting country in relation to open banking. When we look at open banking indexed across the 4 countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam, Thailand is actually the most progressed on the index, right? And a lot of this has got to do with a global payment system called Prompt Pay, right? So the ability for me to enter my to pay somebody by using the mobile number of that person. So regulatory standards for open banking itself are still under discussion again. However, the large banks have started to create product APIs. A lot of them are sort of marketing material, I would say, but there is a lot more sort of focus towards wanting to create such said APIs, right? Fintech companies are struggling, however, to gain access to banking infrastructure, but demand is increasing. The banks and regulatory bodies are conservative and are strict for lending criteria. So what is happening in Thailand is, so startups, or especially in fintech, right, are actually struggling as a result of some very stringent sort of criteria which is being put in place by the BOT, the Bank of Thailand, right? So this is a very good example, is that even more stricter lending criteria, both for offline and online, has been imposed due to the pandemic. It was already hard, or it was already difficult to do micro lending, for example, in Thailand. and that's due to the strict criteria. So a lot of the sandbox in which fintech companies or other startups within the country, it's difficult for them to actually play, right? And so, of course, even more so, they really are turning to the large banks to create these product APIs and or these open APIs. And the banks are listening, but in tradition, are moving fairly slowly. Finally, I'll speak about Vietnam, which I think is, for us at Brankas at least, is probably the blackest box, right? So again, open banking standards are still being discussed, and I would say are not as progressed as the other 3 countries. So no solid roadmap has been put in place yet, and things have been completely put on hold for any sort of development of such a roadmap due to the pandemic, which is different to the other countries. The pandemic, again, has not led to regulatory change. Now, in Vietnam, I think it's well known that they were one of the fastest response countries to the pandemic, right? But as a result, there has been no changes to the regulation. If anything, everything is paused. Fintech is still relatively in its infancy compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. Startups, there are many in Vietnam. There are many startups across many countries from different countries as well. However, fintech is still in its early days, right? Lending companies have been restricted by the regulatory bodies there, and the initiative for open banking layers are started within banks due to innovative initiatives, right? So in other words, what we're finding is that a lot of banks, especially the medium-sized banks, are going off and saying, you know what, we have the technical talent to do this, right? We're not going to wait for the standards to go in place. Let's start building out these, or coming to companies like Brankas in order to build out these layers. Cool. So I'm going to touch a little bit on what have we done to change at Brankas, right? So just exploring some use cases. I'm going to split this between how we've constructed our product team, right, to address, and then also about how we're doing product development second, right? So firstly, we overhauled our structure twice, right? Jana was very kind to ask me to explain the reason why we did this, right? And the reason is, right, the first time that we restructured was because when I joined, we didn't really have a product structure, right? We weren't sure. I mean, we had products, but like, who was working on what, it was a bit of a whirlwind inside the company. And that's not a surprise. This, in fact, I think many people on the call will be very familiar, if you've ever been in a fast growing startup, is that it's just anybody for everybody, right? And get them on to start focusing on things, right? And then you would have one engineer on 3 different products at the same time, right? That sort of situation. So because we had products, we needed to create product teams which are focusing on fixing that problem. So this is the first time that we overhauled the structure. So we went with a very traditional feature team model, right? Product manager with developers, testers, et cetera, et cetera. This led, sorry, not testers. We didn't even have testers at the time. I'm lying when I say that. So product manager with developers. So that's front end, back end. But then we also had, a very small design team or UX team, which sort of jumps between product teams and supports where they can, right? That was basically the structure. That's something which we probably will maintain even with the growth of the design team, because having a centralized model from a design perspective means that it's easier for us. To actually maintain the user experience across multiple products and applications. So this is this this first restructure led to a clear identification of the problems that we were solving for, right? And the corresponding products. It meant that teams had focused backlogs. They could focus on pushing out product. They could develop their own vision. The vision for direct is very different to the vision for statement, again, for disperse, right? However, of course, that restructure happened in February, right? And then, that was when the pandemic started to pick up. And in March, I think it was 13th, I came back from Jakarta, and, everything went into lockdown, right? Everything went into lockdown, and it was pretty much in full flow, right? And so what this led to eventually, right, was that, of course, customers weren't talking to us. There was no where deals were about to get signed and they were going to start transacting with certain products, right? They just froze. They just froze, and we were like, of course, this is when it happens, right? So what did we do? We moved into a more into focused product development, so that we could improve what we had. And we created monthly goals and metrics in order to maintain our focus, right? So then what we did was that teams had set goals for the month, right? And a metric for success tied to each goal. In order for us to stay together when we were working remotely, we were already a remote company before, but at least we have offices in each of the countries. Now we were truly remote. We needed goals in order. So what we refer to as goals-orientated teams. So to focus on delivering on certain aspects of the product to get it out the door, and to ensure that we hold ourselves accountable to these goals, especially within something that we can't control, which is an ever-changing market, right? We also did it on a monthly basis instead of a quarterly basis because, frankly, we just don't know what's going to happen next month. Well, for example, we don't know. I don't know if in Singapore all of a sudden there's going to be another outbreak of more corona cases, right? I don't know what's going to happen within Jakarta. I don't know what's going to happen within Manila. Likewise in Bangkok. So this refocus on a goals-orientated structure has actually galvanized the team to really stay on track with what needs to happen with their respective products, right? And it's if there was a way to say is that there's been especially hustle towards the end of the month because that's always what happens. But teams are delivering on these goals, and we're shipping faster and we're shipping better quality. So that's on the team. I'm going to talk a little bit more about product development, and how COVID-19 has sort of influenced our how we've had to respond to this and how this would look like within emerging markets. So opening up the rails for opening retail banks accounts digitally, since people are limited in setting up accounts through branches. Where this comes from is that we're exploring use cases right now, for example, in the Philippines, in order to very quickly open up a retail bank account on behalf of a consumer digitally due to COVID-19, right? What's happened, of course, in the Philippines through the BSP is that there has been a decrease in, for example, or a relaxing of eKYC, right? Now, of course, the potential for this opens up for fraud, right? But where, you sort of balance, is there a balance between fraudulent activity happening, right? Or, through being able to provide people still the mechanism of being able to open up a bank account, right? That's sort of a trade-off that the Philippines has gone with, right? Which other countries have not been, how would I say it, brave enough to do that, right? So other things that we're doing, right, is we need to work on new methods to pull additional end user information at their consent to support fintech companies because of how they are pivoting, right? To give you guys an example, we have our statement product. What we do is we pull transactional information on behalf of the end user's consent, right? However, what we're finding is that just transactional data is not enough, right? Because no longer are businesses lending anymore, for example, for the statement product. What they have pivoted towards is collecting. What do they need in terms of data in order to collect? They need address. Right? So at the consent of the user, are they able to access address data? That's something that we are sort of trying to support businesses on and pull that information, again, at the consent of the user. Thirdly, working with banks to externalize their core banking infrastructure so that fintech and other startups can more easily access financial products and services, right? And so like this is more on the sort of supply side of our business, but we're trying to push harder with banks, so that we can open up their sort of their core banking systems through an API layer, so that companies, like whether they're fintechs, whether they're e-commerce, they can access these layers, because they're screaming for it, and we hear the screaming, right? Number 4, so like I was mentioning before, Wizard of Ozing, right? Testing new products in market, whether they are like in beta or private beta, not even ready for what would be considered ready for market. It's better. It's the devil you do, or rather than the devil you don't right now. And it's better to ship something which is like not even 80% there, 60% there, and get people interacting with it, so long as you set the expectation, right, that they can influence and help build on the product, right? And so the example of this, actually, we just launched this initiative with Brankas ourselves very recently, which enables customers to do a direct funds transfer, right, through one simple link. So where this problem came from was that we found out in the market, not just within the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Thailand, and in Vietnam, is that the number of side hustles due to uncertainty in the market had drastically increased. And so as a result of this, people were asking to be able to do a funds transfer, right? We'll be able to do a funds transfer via bank, through, whether it's a WhatsApp message or it's a message on Facebook, right? And just giving their bank details in order to do the funds. Now, of course, the security around that is, questionable, right? But that's what they're doing. In order to take the payment, they do that, and they ask for screenshots and things like that in order to take the payment, right? And so we looked at our technology stack and we said, hey, hang on a second, we're really close to solving this problem. Why don't we try something to solve this problem, right? And so, I'm actually just, this is a bit of a shameless shout out, but this is actually a real use case which is happening today with our company, right? But we created like this concept called Brankas Pay, right? It's still in very early stage. We've created a site for people to access, to say that, hey, we're interested in this problem because, I feel the pain. Right? So, we targeted at small merchants, which are transacting on, Instagram, on Facebook, or wherever, right? And we're just saying like, hey, why don't we help you with these things, right? Sign up now and tell us, right, about the problems, because we're already building in that direction. So how can we build the thing that you need, right? And so we already released this, like, I don't know, I think it was like a couple of days ago, and the interest has just shot up, right? The interest has shot up, and what we've found, and I mean, if you're interested to, if you've got your own side hustles, then again, shameless plug, go check it out. But what we're finding is that people are demanding for an ability to just do a bank transfer from any bank account into the target merchant accounts. Now, whether that's a corporate account or it's a personal account, right? I mean, usually in micro businesses, it's personal, right? And so, and from our perspective, the way that we see it is that we're kind of all in this together. We're all in this together, right? So let's work together to come up with solutions with the community, with people who are hustling to get to survive, basically, right? And let's build products which is actually going to contribute to contribute to the to people's small businesses, basically people's well-being, this is in line with Brankas's vision, right? So on that note, I'd like to say thank you for listening. I think we're going to move to questions. I think I've also run over time, and I apologize.
No worries, no need to apologize, Mike. And again, thank you for your presentation. I think we were able to touch base on a lot of stuff. And yeah, those are very insightful, learnings and feedback, especially on the market conditions and how it has affected different Southeast Asian nations and even various industries, not just fintech, with a global pandemic situation. All right, so I think we have the questions streamed up. First question. Oh, this is interesting. Can blockchain help in KYC verification, and in what ways?
That's a really great question. I'll be the first to admit I am not an expert in necessarily KYC. I work with a lot of businesses that do KYC and the such. Can blockchain help in KYC verification? It absolutely can, right? And I'm not sure if anybody has sort of cracked this nut, but I've been talking to a very cool company from the US called Persona. If you're not familiar with those guys, you should check them out. What would be the logical next step, right, from their perspective is like, how do you utilize blockchain in order to store historical checks, right, in relation to KYC, right? Because then you'll be able to detect patterns as to like whether there's fraudulent activity that's happened in the past and things have changed moving into the future, because then that's not just blockchain, then you're applying machine learning concepts to detect certain patterns, right? So again, I'm not an expert on that stuff, and that's a great question. But like, this is, I do think, because so blockchain is such an interesting tool, and we've seen it work with crypto, obviously. But beyond crypto, I still think people haven't found out the appropriate use cases, and so security and the sort of blockchain space seem to be tied probably the most closely together, right? Other than finance, really, right? But great question.
Gotcha. I think also one important thing there is that, implementing blockchain, it's been a buzzword for the past couple of years, but one important thing there is that, implementing something, to go blockchain is like, you're going 3 steps forward. But again, the first step, as you've mentioned, Mike, as well as digitization. And in this case, in different Southeast Asian markets, we see, KYC process being moved from a traditional, brick and mortar process where a customer goes to a branch and, signs up a couple of forms, submits a signature, opens a deposit, into something more digital where, here in the Philippines, you see a lot of fintech companies or fintech applications digitizing the whole onboarding process.
Correct.
Probably
yeah.
a follow-up.
Go for it. Sorry. Yeah. I could talk about this particular topic for a while.
Yeah, because I think at Brankas you're also KYC solutions are also complementary to what you are doing. So I like
they're absolutely complementary. It's been a debate within our company whether we should build it ourselves, right? And because like basically it doesn't fit within open banking necessarily.
Right.
Right, but like at the same time, it's also complementary, and we see that some businesses which are doing things within open banking have gone down that path, and some businesses haven't, because it can be a distraction, right?
Yep, correct. Yeah, I think you answered my question. So my question was whether you are thinking of building it in-house or like partnering with different KYC as a service solutions or providers.
Right now, I can tell you that our model is more on the partnering perspective for that, because there are companies which are really doing a lot of thought on solving this problem. More locally is Trusting Social, right? But like, if you have a chance again to go to withpersona.com, go check out their APIs. Like they've got their They got their shit worked out, to be honest. But like basically, they're doing some really cool stuff in relation to eKYC, and I think they're just beginning. And I think they're actually, and this is a guess, but they are exploring. They are exploring blockchain in relation to KYC, and like how do you, for example, for a particular user, like how do you keep them, how do you know it's the same user which is uploading the same documentation, right? Sure. Well, if they span across applications and they use one application, right, you can use blockchain to maintain that that single string, right?
Exactly. Awesome. All right, second question. How hard is it to adopt Open API? Oh wait, I think I was lost here.
Yeah. How hard is it to adopt Open API? What are the things we need to prepare to take into account? I'm curious to know, is this question more from the bank side or from the fintech side? Because adopt means two different things here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe the person who asked the question can validate.
They chatted.
Okay. Yeah, fintech. Okay, cool. How hard is it? I mean, okay, so from fintech side, right? It all depends on how well has the bank built out their API platform, right? And so, like, if you go into certain banks, so I mean, good examples of Open API. So if you go through to, for example, to the UK, most banks are getting regulated via the PSD2, right? You can go check out like some of their models there, because there is a regulation there which standardizes the APIs, right? In Singapore, there's no standard necessarily. There are guidelines, but like you'll see that there is it's sort of organically heading in the same direction, right? And so it's easier. It's definitely easier for a fintech company or an e-commerce company, right, to be able to a fintech company or an e-commerce company or whichever business who wants to consume these APIs to be able to utilize it, because they know there's a certain structure there, right? In the rest of Southeast Asia, though, okay, first problem is that so many banks don't have open APIs. That's the first problem. So you have to go to the bank directly and negotiate an access point to sanctioned APIs, right? Private APIs. And you need to know the right people for that to happen, right? So that's very difficult. That's difficult, right? The second thing is that if they have started creating open APIs, the standards are all over the place, right? Like what one bank is doing in the Philippines is going to be completely different to another bank. I'm not going to point fingers, right? But you can probably gather who those are very quickly, right? But this is natural, right? To be honest with you, this is natural. This is all dependent upon the knowledge within those companies, and also, well, to be frank, politics, right? Like, and we've got some banks in Thailand, for example. They say they have open APIs, but when you call it, there's nothing there, right? There's nothing. It's just marketing, right? And so like this is like there's definitely a political push to say that they have open APIs when actually it's just fluff, right?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. In that case, Mike, is it correct to assume that since they're in Singapore, the MAS already has standards both for banks and for fintech companies? Like a certain standard to implement different API solutions.
They have examples and guideline, right? But the banks are not regulated to follow that guideline. But of course, they're following it because, well, they're looking at them and going, well, what's the thing that we can marry that up with? Let's look at PSD2. Oh, they're almost the same, right? And so they're going, well, we might as well follow this guideline because it will make it easier for everybody else. That's the mentality, right?
Gotcha.
And so now, of course, it's much easier in Singapore, 5.5 million versus the like, for example, Indonesia, 270 million, like, and I mean, how many banks are there in Indonesia today? Is 112, 14 banks, and those are regional banks, right? And then you've got the 1,300 whatever rural banks, right? So saying that they have to follow organically follow a guideline, it's probably never going to happen, right?
Gotcha. All right. Next question from Alex. Mike, how would you rate the central bank or the BSP thus far in fostering digital or open banking to its sandbox model or regulatory oversight? What's done well? Can it be done better?
Yeah, Alex, thank you for the question. That's a really great question. So I would say that BSP, in terms of how they are fostering digital and open banking, they're doing the right things, right? So for example, BSP are coming to Brankas and they're saying, hey, can you help us out with, like our thoughts on what should be happening from a compliance perspective, right? What should be happening from a technology standpoint, right? And so they're doing these things correctly, right? They're going out, they're asking questions, they're getting feedback from the industry, right? And I think that's really cool. I think that's really cool that they're doing that because when I look at some other countries, right? Again, not pointing fingers, it doesn't happen as often. There's a bit of a wall that gets in the way, right? So what's done well from that perspective, I would say, is that they're soliciting feedback around policies, around technologies that should be used. What are the standards that need to be put in place, and what do different companies suggest, right? What can be done better? If I was going to say selfishly, speed. Right. So, for example, Indonesia has a roadmap going to 2025. I will definitely say that it's not perfect and it's very broad, right? But like if you want to be seen as a way to get ahead, like implement some guidelines up front, like Singapore has. Let the sandbox sort of situation happen first, right? And then come in with the regulations later if things get out of control, right? That's what I would say. And I know that sounds very startup-y, just get an 80% done shipped and then do the 100% later, right? But like I feel like that's something that could definitely help push forward a lot of sort of financial tech companies, not just fintech. I should not bias. Any company that wants to consume sort of these API services, right? Like for example, large businesses in the Philippines, they will want to use like a bank's corporate API in order to pull transactional data, right? For reconciliation purposes, right? I mean, that's nothing to do with fintech. That's just like, hey, I've got like 100,000 people where I pay payroll to, and I need to reconcile this, right? How do I do this? Well, I can either hire like 30 interns to pull bank account data, or I can use a API to just solicit that same call, right?
Yeah, exactly. Awesome.
Good question, Alex.
Thanks, Alex, for your question. Next is from Ashley. Do you mean that in the first restructuring, the teams were more autonomous? I guess this is pertaining to the changes that you did on your team, the latter part of your presentation. And in the second restructuring, goals were set as a company more stringently.
Correct. That's a really good insight. So in the first situation, we went for more autonomy, right? And the reason why we did that, so I you can speak to any of the team members. I think a couple of them are actually on the call today. But I'm a fan of autonomy, right? I think autonomy is good if so long as direction is clear for the company, right? And clear for these individual teams. Each team has their own vision and North Star and yada, 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 right? But we restructured towards a goals focus, just like the pandemic, especially in countries that had the COVID-19 virus under control, right, became much more sort of stringent, right? Because we realized that if we didn't do that, so one thing was for sure is that we weren't gaining customers, right? That was already guaranteed. And so in order to make sure that our runway, was well used, we went more for a goals-orientated structure in order to make sure that we focus way more on product development than customer acquisition, right? Because at the time, the customers weren't coming, right? That was the reality for us. That's a really great question.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, 2 questions from Louis. First question is for the Philippines. How much can open API efforts progress without participation of the big banks? I guess the big banks, Louis probably
Oh,
can
wow.
clarify, but figuring like probably these are the big,
I think I know who the big banks are and who's being referred to. But how much can open API efforts progress without participation of the big banks? This is why at Brankas we have the supply and demand model, right? As in, like, that's how the business is actually thinking. We use these words day in, day out in the company, right? Because the reality is, if demand is screaming, right, then it's only a matter of time before the supply is provided, right? Now, the question is, where does the supply come from, right? Now, if, for example, so as I was mentioning before, in the Philippines, there's the digital banking licenses, which are sort of being developed, right? They're going to come in, right? And they are going to be focusing on open API provision, right? And if their product is better, right, what's going to happen is things are going to take off extremely quickly, right? Very similar thing happened in Indonesia, right? The P2P lending space, realized that there was a gap in the markets, for whatever reason. A lot of it's to do with regulatory and religious, right? But there was a gap in the market for lending, right? And so, of course, all those companies exploded when they got access to certain APIs from certain companies, right? And they grew extremely fast, right? They grew extremely fast. So without participation from big banks, yes, I think it's going to be, in the short term, maybe painful, right? I don't think that's entirely true as well, that all large banks in the Philippines don't want to do open APIs, right? I just think that there is more of a speed consideration, right? And so what's going to happen are the medium-sized guys are going to go, hey, look, new opportunity. Let's start with this first, right? I mean, it's the same with PSD2 in the UK, right? You looked at like the companies, the banks that adopted it first, they were the smaller banks, right? Sorry, not small banks, but they were smaller than the big guys, right? And they could do it because they saw it as an opportunity to acquire new merchants, right? And that's sort of what's happened. And so, like, this is what I expect. I expect will happen in the Philippines, but yeah, let's wait and see.
Awesome. Louis has a second question. Oh, Louis, for your second question, I think Mike and a lot of product PH people are going to be happy to hear this. Mike, for the Philippines, what kind of partners are you looking for? What type of partners is Brankas looking for?
Yeah, great question. Wow, I'm always open to conversations around partnership. Like because through partnership you come up with new use cases, and through new use cases you come up with ways to build new products, right? So, and so from my perspective, I'm always open to conversations. And if it doesn't seem to go anywhere, then that's fine. Like we'll just get on with our merry ways, right? But like I'm always looking for. I can tell you which ones which we definitely come across a lot. So credit scoring facilities, right? We come across companies which are building core banking infrastructure, right? Who are not really focusing on the API layer. So we definitely look at companies like that. Partnership with banks. Like, I'm happy to talk to any bank in the Philippines, or we are, right? eKYC, like, definitely happy talking to like different companies which are doing this, because different eKYC companies and products are solving it slightly differently from the last. So I'm always open to talking to those sorts of organizations. Also looking from the core product side, I'm always, from a partnership perspective, like talking to ERPs, right? So for our statement product, like being able to pull transactional data into a product like Xero, for example, that's something which I'd be always open to. And also e-commerce platforms, definitely open to those. So we're talking to a couple in Indonesia right now to implement our direct product. So that's also companies like Shopify, WooCommerce, right? Like seriously, the great thing about APIs is that the use cases are so flexible, right?
Yeah,
And so
endless,
it's more
like different
it's almost that's right. It's almost endless, and it's like we can come up with so many different use cases. And this is what makes me excited, right? Is because these use cases can be applied to some really specific situations in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, for example, whereby we can help support. So yeah, if you're thinking about what I'm thinking, hit me up and let's have a chat.
Yeah, probably after the session, Mike can also share his contact details, so probably through LinkedIn. Yeah, since we also have the recorded session later on posted in our Facebook group, Mike, probably you can also share your details there.
Yeah, 100%. Happy to. Yeah,
awesome.
Mike Dickinson, Brankas into LinkedIn, you'll find me.
There you go. All right, next question is, considering the market may not be ready in emerging markets, what do you do when the environment or regulatory bodies is not friendly or ready for your product?
Do first, beg for forgiveness later, is my sort of advice, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, the market is never going to be ready, right? In fact, you're never going to be ready with your product either, right? If you were ready with your product, then it's already too late.
Right.
So I would say that if you've got an idea which is solving a problem, go and apply it first, right, to the problem through your hypotheses, right? And if it's just like sort of something that's hacked together or even something that's manually done, right, doesn't really matter, right? But if it really genuinely solves the problem, don't wait for the regulations to catch up, right? Like you gotta take on the market, and people are dying for change. They're dying for it.
Right. I guess, Mike, this also relates. Let me jump real quick before I go back to the second question. There's a third question here. It was mentioned that shipping the product at 60% is initially enough to get people to interact. Can you please expound on this? I just think like it also relates to the question we're trying to answer right now.
Yeah. So what I'm really referring to there is like don't be scared to release something, thinking that you've got to tweak certain things. It's never going to be perfect, right? What I'm sort of getting at more, I mean, we're using percentages in more of a hyperbolic way, right? But like in terms of like this, the 60% component, right, is like even like your product needs to be even less ready to be tested in the market so long, and this is why I said it, that you set expectations with the customer base that it's not ready. And we want you to help us make it ready, right? Because right now people are, to be honest, are being more empathetic, right, and more sympathetic towards everything else because pandemic, right? That's what's happening. And so what I'm saying is like, like your product's never going to be ready, right? Things may not be working 100%. Just push it out and see how people interact with it. So long as you set the expectation up front that it's not perfect, right? And we're working on it, but we need your help to work on it, because it's better to have live, active users breaking your product rather than you just sitting there making assumptions until you think you've got it at 100% when you've actually only really have it at 60%.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mike. All right, probably we can answer last three questions because of the time. But in case you would have any other questions for Mike, feel free to comment out on the recorded session later on, and pretty sure Mike will be more than happy to answer those questions. Okay.
Do my best.
Going back, what do you think as key success factor to win the market in open banking, and why?
Win the market in open banking. I'm trying to figure out if this is referring to us or is this referring to banks. I mean, the way I see open banking as winning, right, is that companies are able to plug into banks and the other way around, right? So what I mean by that is that right now it's already difficult as it is, right, to expose core banking services to fintech companies, e-commerce, whatever, right, to the demand side as I referred to before, right? It's already difficult to do that because they don't exist, right? The majority of the time they don't exist. A lot of banks are more hungry for it than others, but really, when we look at the grander scheme of things, they do not exist, right? I think a key success factor of what winning looks like for open banking in this region is that when banks have stopped exposing core banking services, right, but it started to go the other way around where banks are consuming APIs from other companies which can provide products from their side, right? So what I'm referring to there are like, let's say, for example, in Singapore, this is happening already. DBS, one of the most successful banks in the world, is currently able to, so they have a marketplace where they're consuming an API from a car sales website, right, and providing the ability to purchase a car, but also using DBS's loan application system directly on the marketplace itself in order to find out if they are eligible to take the loan and even get the loan on the spot to buy the car on that marketplace. I mean, that's pretty cool shit, right? And from my perspective, like when you've got it happening both ways, right? From my perspective, that's when you're really going to start seeing success, right?
Thanks, Mike. Second to the last question is, how do we create a metric to say that a product version can already be shipped?
A metric to say when a product version can be shipped. Well, I mean, it really depends.
Yeah, I guess in different use cases, different industries, really depends, right?
I mean, yeah, it really depends. It does really depend. But I would say that, okay, so first and foremost, make sure that your product has a general vision. I mean, this is different to your company vision, different, right? Make sure your product has a metric for success or a North Star, right? If you don't know how to make a North Star, it's very easy. Go check out, I've mentioned this to many people before, but Alex Schultz, who's the VP of Growth for Facebook, he has presentations and lectures online about how to develop your North Star. It's not rocket science, it's easy stuff to do, right? Once you've determined that, you assign, you need to figure out how to assign a metric, right, which impacts the user. So in your user story, for example, if you're putting it down to that level, right, as a user, I want to do this so that they can do that, right? What is actually the impact that improves the user's experience, right? And then how do you apply a metric to that, right? Once you know what that metric is, then it's more about saying, okay, at what point do we say that there's that we have achieved what we need to achieve with this particular user story, get it deployed and see how users interact, and then iterate on it until they like what that feature is, right? So that's sort of at the user story level, right? But really, it's about being customer centric, and that's how you apply the metric. It's very easy to fall into the world of vanity metrics. I'm sure many people have sort of thoughts and opinions about that. But like really, it's about deriving value for the user, right? And the metric should be tied to that.
I guess it also comes in, in product management, we have this product feedback loop. I guess, in the user-centric perspective, like it's really important to gather feedback and determining your hypothesis later on.
Yeah, 100%. And you may even find that your metric doesn't even make sense, right? And that's okay. Like that's totally fine. Like don't think that, when you hear things like North Star, when you hear things like, hey, we need to sign, metrics to this particular epic, right, in the backlog. Like you should definitely remember that like process is also an iterative thing. Don't ever get locked into process. You should always iterate on it. I sort of I try and bang this into people's heads in our current company, right? But it's like something that, like you should always, just like with product, you should be always iterating through process, and metrics is just a component of process.
Thanks for that, Thanks for that, Mike. And our last question would be, can you please provide an overview on how to approach product development or management in general in emerging markets?
Wow, that's a large last question to hit.
That's a pretty,
I might have to try and take this from one angle in particular, right? And this is not just necessarily applicable to emerging markets, right? But understand what is the problem that whatever you think your idea is about, right? Understand the problem first, right? So one thing that we do at Brankas pretty well, I would say, is we structure problem, hypothesis, solution. Everything that we do is based on that structure, right? If you don't state the problem up front, you lose people's interest almost immediately, right? And so in emerging markets, right, what happens over here very often is, with product people, and not just product people, UX people as well, is that, what I find is that the idea has already been solidified before even understanding what the problem is, right? And so this is actually something which I test for in interviews that I do with people, right? Is like, are you actually understanding what the problem is first? Before you even start solution or even hypothesizing and solutioning as to what needs to happen. So my sort of the one part of this massive question that's being asked. It's a great question. Sorry, it's a great question. It's just that we could spend an entire presentation on this. But the one thing which I would say is that when you're building out a product team and you're trying to hire product people, right? Do they focus on like, what is the problem statement? And what are they solving for as a result of understanding what that problem is before you start doing all this ideation stuff, right? Because frankly, ideas are cheap, right? And they and as we have seen in this market, they are. I mean, there's a reason why, not because of COVID-19. There's a reason why investment has dried up a little bit, right? Because products are not working. They're not working because it's just. They're just ideas. They're just ideas. And unfortunately, they are probably not solving a problem which is important enough.
Okay. Thanks for that, Mike. And thanks again for your presentation.
Yeah, that's completely fine. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm sort of more than happy to have a chat. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm generally pretty responsive. If I'm not responsive, it's me. I'm not trying to be insensitive. It's just that there's a lot going on right now. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure your inbox will be filled later on, Mike. I see. All right, thanks again, Mike. Yeah, I guess before we end tonight's session, again, I mentioned at the beginning that we have something for you guys since we are already organizing meetups virtually. So we also have a bonus session for this month. It's going to be a lean coffee session, basically discussion about anything under the sun on product management. So we'll be organizing 1 hour group calls with 4 to 5 people per group by Jitsi, and basically the discussion will be on anything. It can be from product management, your current work, your current career, in your current industry, the global pandemic we're facing. It can be as far as like things that hurt that are a pain in the butt in your organization, anything. So anyway, Yana will be organizing it together with the other organizers as well, and we're aiming to do this on the 3rd week or the 4th week of July. So we'll keep you posted via Facebook as well as meetup.com on our Product PH group on the details for this. And again, Mike, thank you so much for joining our July Product PH activity. We really appreciate your insights on this. And yeah, for those who haven't joined yet, please feel free to join our Facebook and Meetup groups. It's facebook.com/group/productph. And on Meetup, it's meetup.com/product-ph. Lastly, if you want to take your Product PH membership up a notch, you can actively engage in the community by being an organizer, such as myself. Simply reach out to Jan Pabellon or to Yana, and we'll be happy to have you over as one of Product PH's organizers. Again, my name is John. Mike, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Likewise to
Uh,
yourself and everybody else. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you to everyone who attended tonight's activity. And hopefully we'll see you on the Lean Coffee session on the end of July and on the August Product PH session as well. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great evening.
Cool. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.